Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And on the news front, well, it's the war, I think, that is starting to take center stage when it comes to news in EVE Online over the last week, as it starts to develop into Delph itself, the home base, the home region of the Imperium. We are starting to see supers being fielded, bigger fights, more contested fights, and even CCP is getting on the bandwagon with the latest pulse. So I think it's very cool. I like to witness this from a distance, although at some point, perhaps if there's like some really big fights, perhaps I'll try to get my interceptor there. But we also know from like the last GM week, where we had like a few thousand people going after bots in a single system, these types of fights are big tie-dye fests, and those are not for everyone. They're definitely legendary fights when it comes to just gaming in general, just because of the sheer size of it, but I would personally not call these fun. There's people that enjoy that type of gameplay, and again, a reminder, EVE Online is a sandbox. There's really no wrong way of playing the game, but from the sidelines it is super impressive. I actually also watched a stream where someone explained a little bit with all the sides where the Imperium is, the logistics of getting a keep star so close to Delph and all of that stuff. Very, very cool, and so that is definitely something to keep in mind. There seems to be quite a bit more destruction happening at the moment in the universe. We also had the economic numbers for last month. Or for August, haven't gone through those just yet. Because I played a little bit less EVE Online, and you may notice during this EVE talk that sometimes I need a little bit more time to click on stuff and things like that. So I just want to be upfront on that. If you notice this, I somehow managed to get my right index finger stuck in a door 2 days ago. So right now it's got this lovely blue nail on it because it hurts quite a bit at the time. At the moment it's a lot better, and I could always still just move my finger as normal. There's nothing broken or anything like that, but to use it is a bit of a problem. So to write stuff is not easy at the moment. To cut my food, wherever I need to put a little bit of force on that index finger, it's a bit of a problem. And so even moving the mouse, I mean, it works, but I have to be careful. And so I was basically just trying to recover from that shock that first evening, and yesterday was just trying to get through the day without having too much pain. But yeah, that's just a side note. Let's get started with the New Eden store. Let's see if there's anything special happening here. There is a special sale on Omega time, but I think that's for like the direct subscriptions, where we have here still Zento Isideko skin front and center, those Kaldari yellow, white, a little bit of black in there. Pretty cool, but yeah, no sales, no bundles, nothing really front and center. This is just the New Eden store running normally. That means that we get to move on straight to the market, and we'll start with plex and stuff coming in at 3:30. There we go. Let's get started, and you may already have seen it from the ticker, but plex is up a little bit, above 2.8 million for the sellers in Jita. Buyers are above 2.6 million for perimeter trading tower, above 2.7 million, and the buyers are going up a little bit as well, above 2.6 million. So still a pretty narrow margin, but right at the tail end here you can see that plex seem to want to move up a little bit at this point. Could be the war, I must say. I've seen even more propaganda. I've actually start to see it flow into, I would say, the non-EVE gaming sphere as well. The fact that there is this huge war starting in EVE Online. Saw some more Twitch streams as well, 500-600 viewers on that for a possible timer. So there's definitely interest out there, and I do think that that is starting to mean returning players as well. It's October, perhaps returning after the summer is starting to get into full swing as well. Next up, we have the multiple pilot train certificates. Same little trend at the tail end here. Definitely today's daily average and yesterday was up from what we have seen before. We are talking almost 1.4 billion for most sellers of the multiple pilot trading certificate. GTA 4.4 is above 1.4 billion, and the buyers were staying decently in place just below 1.3 billion ISK. For the skill extractor, sellers still above 304 million ISK, almost 305 in fact, and the buyers, they're still just below 300 million, but it's only by a fraction. So again, very narrow margin here, and not yet seeing that sign of an increased price for skill extractors just yet. Let's take a look at the impact on the skill injectors that were dropping a little bit last week. Here are the large skill injectors still wanting to drop, getting back below that 700 million ISK for their average price, and we are talking 699 for the sellers, 668 for the buyers. Again, quite a bit of hesitation in the market as well, very narrow margin between sellers and buyers. At the moment though, a bit more aggressive selling in the injectors is driving the price back down. For the small skill injectors, same thing. Well, it had been trending like that for most of the month of September, so we're seeing a little bit more stalling here at the end for the small scale injectors. 142.5 million for the sellers, 123 for the buyers, so a bit more margin opening up here, but it's the buyers going down in price, which is going to probably be followed by some more aggressive selling. We could dive below 140 for the sellers if we're not careful. I think it could happen. CCP still being very generous with skill points across the board, with daily login rewards and things like that. And then not that long from now, I mean, it's surprising how quick these years go at the moment, or these months go at the moment. We get the holiday season and things like that coming as well, which generally means that we get quite a bit more SP from CCP through those channels as well. Then we have our daily alpha injectors continuing to really do its own thing. Very nice, surprising jump up to 45 million ISK for the daily alpha injectors, 48 in fact for the sellers, and almost 40 million for the buyers. That's where the sellers were at about a week ago, so this is a surprise jump, definitely proving that the daily alpha injector market is its own market. Not yet a one-year high point, that's up to 55 million on the daily averages, but definitely all of a sudden above average. Pretty good time to sell if you manage to buy these at the low point of around 30 million ISK right here in May. And it's its unique market, its own audience, its own consumption for alphas, and this is quite a bit surprising. Not really seeing a big volume change, so correct me if I'm wrong. Does this have something to do with the CCP sale? I don't think so. Perhaps, yeah, quite a few people trying the game all of a sudden and finding these daily alpha injectors to be right up their sleeve. 45 million definitely feels doable, right? A little bit of luck with exploration, some missioning perhaps if you manage to make your way into battleships, and then one of these daily alpha injectors is definitely pretty affordable, quite a bit more than like a large skill injector, for instance. That's almost a billion ISK. And then finally we have the hypercores that have been jumping and then going back down quite a bit all over the place as well. A bit of volume increase here. That is slightly interesting to me personally. 282,000 ISK for most sellers, almost 290 in GTA 4.4, and 274,000 for the buyers. And yeah, this increased volume right here, starting at basically the second half of September, to me could be an indication. Let's take a quick look at consumption here. That's actually down in price a bit and then all of a sudden jumping up. But yeah, the hypercores could be another indication of increased activity in EVE Online. Let's see if it holds up and how this 20-day moving average especially remains. Does it stay around 300 million ISK? Could be an indication of sustained increased activity. Definitely worth it to keep an eye on all of this. Let's move on to the minerals, coming in at 910. That hurts a little bit to write, but let's get going. Here is the titanium chart. So we had last week's panic buying as CCP announced that HiSec in mid-October would become the sole provider of titanium. We jumped up to 9 ISK for the average price, and things have settled down as of course this change is not live yet. People are probably mining up a storm. I myself am also mining a little bit extra in detail, just getting some reserves up and running. I'm compressing at the the moment, because I think the best opportunities could still lie in compressed ores and then selling at the right time for the right buyer. But here we go, sellers up to 9.68 ISK, down a little bit from the peak last week, but it is still of course a crazy high price for titanium, and buyers forced up above 9.10 ISK as well. Very narrow margin, showing that aggressive buying to be ready when this change hits, to have the reserves to be able to weather the storm, hopefully. Not sure if that's going to work out. That's well, because who knows how long CCP is going to keep this going. I mean, the drought phase will now be going into its 9th month or 10th month, I think. So it is pretty damn serious. CCP wants to cut down on all of those reserves. And for titanium, well, it's already up in price quite substantially. I would say that for high-sec miners, of course, on the longer term, this is probably part of the game plan. This is a unique mineral, as I've said in my video about all of these changes as well. It's the bulkiest one, it's the hardest one to move, but making this very rewarding for newer players to still mine and to go after, I think, is part of the strategy here as well. Next up, let's take a look at pyrite. Also, of course, the panic buying right here. Bit of a jump, but you can see 1 year high points at around 8 ISK, and we're stalling here. 681 for the sellers, 657 for the buyers, so definitely quite a bit of demand, and some reserves seem to be coming out of the woodworks here. 570 million units being sold, potentially at this better price, and so some traders, I think, are also starting to switch their modes here a little bit, dumping what they have left. Could be a little bit early, but we will see. Here is pyrite up, but nothing too special just yet. And then what I'm really interested in is Mexalon trending back up and continuing to maintain that trend back above 90 ISK, and apparently dares to stay for now. 98 for most sellers, getting up to 100 ISK decently quickly on the front page of the sellers. Buyers are up above 90 ISK at this point as well. Very aggressive, and also I would still say potentially a bottleneck mineral, although it has been said that Noxim has taken over as being the primary bottleneck in nullsec, and that won't go any better, I think, with it becoming unique to lowsec. But Mexalon still very expensive, even historically speaking. 70 ISK was probably still a good price for Mexalon, so this increased price here is yet another opportunity. If you're mining, Mexalon and titanium make a lot of sense. It's going to be pretty good ISK per hour and per cubic meter at the moment. Then what I am interested in is Isogen. Will that be able to change things? And yeah, becoming unique to lowsec has a pretty damn big impact. Started the year at around 15 ISK, then we did really well to jump up to 20 and then even 25 ISK, which was trying to be defended for most of the summer here, doing so decently well, but I kept seeing pretty big sell orders keep us from jumping up to like 30, 40 and perhaps more. And so here, of course, panic buying. This is just an incredible volume that has traded hands here. All of a sudden, people taking positions, some deciding, all right, we're getting a crazy price for the first time in a year, I'm gonna dump everything that I have, while others are saying, I'm looking more at the longer term. If you have to grab this from lowsec for the next year, perhaps even for forever. This 180 that CCP has done from self-sustainability to interdependence, to me, does sound like something that's here to stay. Lots of buying then from Isogen, even at these higher prices. Volumes have remained high, and so the price has not gone down too much in the last couple of days after the initial spike. And this means 64 ISK for the sellers of Isogen, 55, 53 for the buyers. And here the volumes, they clearly have gone down already in availability by individual orders. And this to me is very, very interesting, because something that I always keep in mind, Isogen used to be more expensive than Mexalon. Are we going back for these days? That is, in my opinion, possible, especially now that you'll have to go to lowsec in order to get some substantial amounts of Isogen. 64 ISK, that's compare that to 15 ISK at the start of the year, is of course a pretty damn big win in price. And Yeah, very interesting to see this massive jump in Isogen all of a sudden, but let's keep that in mind if we want if we keep that metric in mind of this reverse situation which exists for Isogen and Mexalon, for Pyrite and Tritanium. Not anymore, I don't think. Yeah, still yeah, for Pyrite and Tritanium. And for Zydrine and Megasite, not really sure what's happening there, but if CCP is planning to go back for a reverse situation of those, we still have a ways to go despite this massive jump up here in price all of a sudden. This is double the price and more on the seller side of things in just about a week for Isogen. Crazy stuff, but it doesn't stop, I don't think. Here is Noxium. That's another very impressive chart. This one has stalled a little bit at the tail end, but went up to 1,250. Is becoming pretty much as expensive as Zydrine, and this is of course also because of its low sec uniqueness that CCP has announced here. Here are the volume jumps in the couple of days, and this one was really in already a very impressive increased price over the last couple of months. You can see we started the year below 250, we went up to 500 on the announcement that all right, we're going into this drought phase. This is happening across the board, so some position taking there, I think, as well, just like with these volumes, some people selling, some people buying. And then we had this very slow periods of spring up into early summer, up to July, where the price just didn't really move too much. And throughout this period, and I think I'm right on that, I said these are reserves, these are just old stocks of Noxium that are keeping this price in check, but eventually you run out of those, and that's what happened in July and August. We start to go up in price, definitely more than double the price in a couple of months, and then of course the announcement of the dev block jumping up yet again, making us go up to 5 times the price from the start of the year at its high point. Noxium is still trading for 1,160 for the first seller, going up to 1,200 very quickly for the sellers. That's a crazy price, even historically speaking. And buyers, well, one coming in at 1,000 disc, 970 for most buyers at the moment. Noxium and Isogen will be very interesting come these changes. Then we have our former nullsec that are back to nullsec minerals. Right here is Zydrine, jumped up to 1250. Actually had this early jump as well, up to 1,000 disc in spring, April, May, something like that. And so you can see we had a pretty damn good performance up to the summer, and now it's just building on that, but nothing too major. 1,300 though for the sellers, that's really high. 1,140 for the buyers. They're definitely up there as well at the moment in price. And then for this week's surprise, Megasite is actually jumping back up a little bit as well. But we gotta keep this in mind. Starts at the high point is 600 discs, starts at 400. So all of this feels quite a bit more limited compared to quite a few of these other minerals. Almost 600 discs for the sellers and 500 discs for the buyers. That's still a pretty big margin that allows for a pullback in the price of Megasite as well. But this week, Megasite actually jumping up very high percentage-wise, and so if you want that Twitch trade right now, you know, if you bought for like 400 disc, you can sell for 600 at the moment. That is not a bad trade. And then finally, we've got Morphite that also jumped up on the news, of course. But again, not the 1 year high point, so we are talking, whoops, here we go, 1,740 ISK, no, 17,400 ISK, excuse me, for the sellers and 16,000 for the buyers. So we should have bought when we touched that 10k, because that has always been the right investment price for Morphite. I just did not expect in such short order to see this jump again. Of course, that dev block was quite a bit of a bombshell all of a sudden. So minerals across the board are mostly normalizing from the shock. Basically, you can see all of them 5-day moving average pulling back a little bit. Tritanium stalling that increase, Pyrite stalling that increase. There is one exception, Isogen still going stratospheric a couple of days after that announcement. Even Noxium is stalling, so it does show that low sec is going to play a very big role there into how things will move for Isogen and for Noxium. But across the board we have this shock to the resource, the base resource system of minerals that is being absorbed by the market, and it does mean substantially higher prices. Great time to be a miner. Next up, the PI market. That's coming in at 1930. Like that. Let's go over these and see if perhaps there is a sign of increased demand, increased activity. Unfortunately, here in the broadcast notes, that is not being confirmed. Look at us go back down. In fact, average price last couple of days below 1.75 million ISK. We're talking 1.84 million for the sellers, 1.7 million for the buyers, a couple of buyers, that's it. And then we go down to 1.5 million. So clearly, again, not a lot of demand, quite a bit of pressure on these broadcast notes, despite the resurgence up here as we had the announcement of the new cores for the structures, which some players assumed, and myself included, that we would see more destruction, perhaps more production as well, so more demand. We had this vibe late summer. If we see more activity in the game at late summer, we could see more demand here across the board. And so we had a nice jump up back to the average price of 2 million ISK for broadcast nodes, but to no avail right here at the tail end. I think also ISK needing to flow into minerals is exacerbating a problem here. And so we're diving back down very quickly. Construction blocks next is confirming that. We also had that build up to 10k, but we just cannot maintain that. We had a couple of sellers below 10k last week, and it's going down to 9,800 this week. 9,000 ISK for the buyers, again showing demand is not there. Consumer electronics, did well to get back above 10k as well, and look at that, we're heading back for a 1-year low point. 8,900 for the sellers, and look at that lack of demand, less than 8,000 ISK for the buyers. Coolants tied to fuels was definitely already not doing too well, and basically throughout the entire summer we were below 10,000 ISK. We're just not moving from that at the moment. 9,800 for the sellers, 9,100 for the buyers. Cryoprotectant solutions, this was a bit of a surprise. We have some that have this nice little jump here in the middle, March, April. Those are tied to the production of implants, and so here I was kind of hoping to see like a real dive down so that we could buy some cheap ones, hoping and waiting for Vorton and Edencom related implant sets and things like that. But they kept creeping up to my surprise, but that is stopping. In the last week here, we are going back down substantially. 124,000 for most sellers, 111,000 for the buyers. If that goes down to less than 100,000 ISK, that would be my personal jumping point. Enriched uranium, also, very bad during the summer, went down to 10,000 ISK, which for enriched uranium is really low. We tried to get back, but you can again see at the tail end that we are stopping that increased price. 12,340 for the sellers, 11,750 for the buyers, and again here a bit of pressure at the end. Integrity response drones continuing to stall as well right here, landing on 2 million ISK, 2.2 million for the sellers, 2 million for the buyers. So one of the strongest performers, I would say, at the moment, able to defend its price range of 2 million pretty well. But let's keep in mind this full chart clearly indicates that an average price should be a decent chunk above 2 million ISK as well. Mechanical parts back on the downtrend, away from 10,000 ISK, on the bad side if that's what you're looking for. And look at that, 10,000 ISK for the sellers, 9,000 ISK for the buyers. And so what this indicates, there is so low demand that actually the average price is close to these buyers. So despite this, there's just producers that are dumping straight to these buyers. Then we've got nanites, very flat, no sign of that one pulling back again. Here is that March-April bubble, if you want to call it a bubble, of course. But I'm looking for less than 5,000 ISK to jump in. 6,500 for the sellers, 5,900 for the buyers. That's still a bit too early. Then we've got our nano factories, also able to defend its gains, staying well above 1 million ISK here. Not bad. 1.2 million for the sellers, 1 million for the buyers. Organic motor applicators, that one has to give back a little bit of ground here. Back to 900,000 for the sellers, 814 for the buyers. Recursive computing model, trying to get back there, but not succeeding too well. Yeah, there's a bit too much pressure here on the sellers, and in fact, We could probably look at perimeter as well, although it is competing with Cheetah, so the lowest price is actually in Cheetah 4.4. There's a bit more supply than what you're seeing here. Less than 1.5 million for the sellers, 1.3 million for the buyers. Bit of pressure and hesitation. Robotics was terrible last week and is just not going well below 80,000 disc for the sellers, 77,000 for the buyers. 1 year low point, very, very cheap robotics. Self-harmonizing power cores, losing all its gains, managed to get up to 2 million ISK, is down to 1.9 for the sellers and 1.6 for the buyers. Again, classical lack of demand in PI that we've had for over a year at this point, I'm gonna say, or almost a year at this point. And it's just not stopping. It could also be that, you know, as the player base gets more established, this is a very passive can be a very passive way of making some ISK, and perhaps there's more and more players that are basically getting into that jumping point where they have some alts that are producing the base materials, and that is just causing lots of pressure on the price. There is just more supply than demand, and it may not just be demand side of things. Here we have the sterile conduits. Advanced PI materials actually able to keep its average price, almost 1.4 million for the sellers. But look at this again, 1.1 million for one buyer, and then we go down to 940,000 discs. That's a massive margin between sellers and buyers that's opened up, and without a lot more demand or with just a bit of supply, we are going to crash this price down very quickly. Yukomi superconductors, another one that I'm keeping an eye out because of this February jump here. Less than 100,000 now for the sellers, 82,000 for the buyers. But if I look at this chart, I would love to see 50k for the buyers. And then with our mainframes, also clearly under pressure yet again. 1.8 million for the sellers, 1.6 million for the buyers. And again, we can't browse here, so 2 buyers gone. We're below 1.4 million and a pretty sharp dive down. So yeah, PI struggling with that lack of demand. That's obvious, but perhaps also as the player base gets established, we just have a bit too much passive supply happening here as well. Although I personally love the passive nature of PI. For me, once every 24 hours, I go up to coolants and things like that. So I'm not building on even more complex stuff. And I actually like that. It's a nice little injection of ISK every month or so for me. Let's move on to the advanced moon materials, coming in at 27 minutes. Right, and let's get started with the carbonite type items. Crystalline carbonite able to maintain most of its gains after a nice rush at the end of August up to the middle of September, going up towards 170, currently 167 for the sellers and 146 for the buyers. This is clearly now trading at a far more normal range, slightly above average, definitely on the sellers of things, and potentially this is one of those categories that is heavily impacted by Nyarja, as production and the supplies tend to try and find the easiest routes for easy selling, but also enough supplies for producing, which means more demand. All of that is very interesting, and to see this above average price for crystalline carbonite from Galente for Galente Tech 2 production is pretty interesting. So let's see what the next one is. 2.1 titanium carbide for the local Caldari. That one seems to still be well supplied and is staying below average at a price point of 168 for the sellers and 148 for the buyers. Let's quickly compare those sellers. Yeah, very much in line with crystalline carbides as well. Next up, we have the Fernite carbide for Minmatar production, and that one is, well, this is a completely different chart, which is of course tied to the war, as the Munin Minmatar Tech 2 cruiser is still very much in the meta for the Imperium. We had this first war spike up to 200 ISK, then here we have the second one up to 175. You can clearly see that this is on a rush on materials, that this happens, very big volumes that trigger these increased prices. So this is a little bit harder to tell exactly how we are going to settle on this, but it's at the moment at 151 for the sellers and 126 for the buyers. And last time we overshot a little bit in supply. We went to close to 1 year low point below 125. This time it looks to me like we are a bit more careful with not oversupplying the market, or it is possible that some other trade hubs are of course taking some of that supply and are keeping this from crashing back down so quickly again. So ferrite carbide trading for slightly above average price of 150, recovering from this spike. And then finally we have tungsten carbide for ships that is also back on an average price on the chart for sure, but also substantially more expensive than quite a few of these others, currently trading for 190 for the sellers, 175 for the buyers. And look at this, this is the supply. Definitely feels like there's not that much, and that is causing a slight increase in price. Let's take a look at the next phase then. We've got the meta materials. 2.1 is what 1.2 is what I'm looking for. So photonic meta materials for Galente Tech 2 production went to a 1 year low point despite the fact that Nyarja had fallen and is now recovering from that back at its 50k, slightly below average. 15,000 for the sellers, 15,000 for the buyers. That is showing some stronger demand here all of a sudden. So that's a pretty decent recovery that could have legs on a bit of demand. Then we have our next 2.1, yeah, okay, 1 point. Next, Caldari Metamaterials 2.2. Here we go. Oh man, I still have to get back into that logic. Maybe I should change this data a little bit to make it more easy. But alright, here are the non-linear metamaterials, Caldari Tech 2 production, and this also had this dip in September below 20,000 disc and is now recovering nicely, getting back above average. 23,400 for the sellers, 22,600 for the buyers. Very, very nice recovery, pretty impressive. Then we have our 3.2 plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar production, despite the first spike right here. Let's take a look at that. So you had this first spike right here in July, which had a response to in the metamaterials as well. Now we're staying below 20,000 disc and there is basically no response to the second spike in the base material. Less than 20,000 for the sellers, less than 18,000 is for the buyers. Still a decent margin and one that is apparently trading below average at the moment. Perhaps the overshot that happened here has meant that we have basically been oversupplied a little bit too long now for plasmonic metamaterials, and there's just too much stuff in order to get another spike going. And then finally we have terahertz metamaterials, got them misclicked here for the Minmatar. Same September dip, in fact a little bit worse than all the others, with a low point of 15,000 disc mid-September, is now slowly recovering from that. Yeah, decent recovery though. 19,400 for the sellers, 17,000 for the buyers. So that one is also crawling out of the hole. Very different situations in these carbide and metamaterial segments, with the metamaterials just trying to recover, trying to get back to average, but these carbides showing some signs that supplies are a bit of a problem, and you can definitely ask a more than reasonable, more than average price at the moment for quite a few of these. And then we have the more generic advanced PI materials. Here is fermionic condensates continuing to struggle at the moment, well below average. 78,000 for the sellers, 76,000 for the buyers. Then we have the ferrogel chart. Last week went to a 1 year low point, bit of a bounce, but really nowhere near the 40k average for the year. 34,000 for the sellers, 33,000 for the buyers. This is a bit of opportunistic buying at this very low price point, but the oversupply seems to just be general. Fullerite's landing on 750, 790 for the sellers, 751 for the buyers. So again, showing that it's quite a bit of dumping happening even to the buyers, despite being at 1 year low prices. This is quite a turnaround from a very strong spring and summer for Fullerites, well above 1,000 disc. For most of that was super impressive, but once we got back on that 1,000 disc average, then there was just no stopping the descent, and we are now very low. Hypersynaptic fibers also below 10,000 disk and staying there. Then we have our nano transistors, another 1 year low point. This is really quite a trend breaker. This one managed to move between 5 and 6,000 disk for most of the year, and quite stable in a pretty good region. And now 4,000 for the sellers, 4,000 for the buyers, just dumped to death at a 1 year low point again. Phenolic composites had that same problem, went below 1500 disk here, is crawling out of that, but very, very slowly. 1600 for the sellers, 1600, bit below that for the buyers. And then finally ceramic fibers had this odd jump up to 450, but look at how quickly that gets plugged by the market, and we're back well below average at 340 for the seller. So in the Tech 2 production lines we see some weird stuff. In the general advanced move materials we are definitely struggling with low prices. Let's take a look at the impact on Tech 2 ships then at 34.45. There we go. And I hope that I'll be able to read it, because it does look like a toddler wrote this, but I think we'll make it. Let's get started. Here is the Basilisk that had a nice jump up to 230 million last week. That's pretty much tradable, especially if you could buy a buy order. I think we went close to 180 million at the low end here, and we're recovering from that. So for the Basilisk we're talking 221 for the sellers. I mean, if you bought for 180, close to that, you can still try to sell at the moment, and almost 200 million for the buyers. We're in that in-between spot as we recover from a nice jump. Then we have the Cerberus that is back on the downtrend, getting very close to 1 year low point. Average price is below 200 million. 200 million for the sellers, 188 million for the buyers. So if you can buy one of these below 190 million ISK, if you try to get that one to show, that is definitely a very nice spot to be ready. And if we then get our spikes, look at the potential, very, very nice. It is a bit riskier because of the last couple of months, of course, but with what's happening with advanced movements, I honestly would not blame you for jumping on these opportunities. Here is the Guardian landing at 180, also very, very cheap here. Complete lack of demand, 164 million for the sellers, 185 for the buyers. You can definitely try to grab a cheap Guardian at the moment. Then we've got the Hound that had a little bit of a bounce right after I bought mine, and is currently working on another low point on a complete lack of demand. 24 million for the sellers, 21.5 million for the buyers. Very, very cheap, very low, and despite that we have big volumes here, so we still have a decent amount of ships that were brought in the last week that have just crushed the price of sellers down to, god damn it, 24 million ISK. So under pressure quite a bit in these Tech 2 ships so far. Let's take a quick look at the Iquitursa that had a slight jump up to 450, but now look at that, is moving below 400 million as well. 399,600, practically 400 million for the sellers, but just below that. And the buyers, again, not that many of them, going below 370 million ISK. Then next we have the Ishtar that's trying to move its way back to 230, which is, the low end of its normal price. We're just not there yet. 223 million for the sellers, 210 for the buyers. I'm kind of wondering if across the board we're starting to see these low prices. Let's take a look at the Manticore. Yeah, try to jump back, but is getting back towards 25 million on the average price. 26 for the sellers, 23.4 million for the buyers. And again, look at the demand. It's not that high. Then we have the Munin. Despite being in the meta, it is selling below 200 million ISK. Buyers are at 175 million, so also showing not great a price. Nemesis, that was pretty nice, right? Went down to 20 million, 1 year low point, jumped up to 27.5 million. That was tradable, and now we are, well, stalling on in between. 24 million for the sellers, 21 million for the buyers. So definitely on the cheap side as well, though. Oneros has been struggling for the last couple of months, so we're not going to go over this one again. If you want to buy one, do so. I would never buy more than one with these types of volumes. Then we have the Panther jump due to the rebalancing that happens, because went up to 1.3 billion. So I was kind of hoping to see this downtrend in average prices show through these bigger battleships as materials became cheaper. Unfortunately, CCP threw a wrench in that plan, but we're getting plugged in supply very quickly here. 1.3 billion down to 1.26 billion, 1.2 billion. Someone is actually selling one at 1.1 billion, which is sort of validating my theory that the production cost is not actually going up at the moment. It's pretty low, and so even someone selling at this price is probably making some ISK. Buyers are below a billion ISK. Then we have the Purifier that is crawling out of that 1 year low point, staying below 30 million though. 27.6 million for the sellers, and again some supply starting to come online here already, so this ought to stall the increase, and buyers at 25 million mostly. For the Scimitar, continuing to struggle as well, pretty damn low, 183 million for the sellers. Look at the lack of demand, all of them below 170. And then the Widow also had a little bit of a jump on that announcement, but is being plucked very quickly down to 1 billion again for the sellers, and just below 1 billion for the buyers. And then the Zealot, that worked its way back to 230. I should have sold there because I bought pretty low, is back down to 217 for the sellers and 190 for the buyers. So clearly in the Tech 2 ship market this week, I'm seeing a lack of demand across the board, and I'm kind of wondering if the market has perhaps been spooked a little bit by what CCP had said during the live stream after the announcement of the resource crunch. So my thinking here is that they definitely said that perhaps we should look at Tech 3 ships as well. And right now Tech 2 ships are dominating quite a few activities in my opinion. And so we had this decently strong demand, quite a bit of use in PvP as well, which is why you're getting these lovely spikes that are awesome, of course, for speculation. I mean, the stealth bombers, 1, 2, 3, 4, very pronounced spikes, and then you could have bought really low. So this is stuff that's very much tradable. But here now, first of all, of course, advanced materials struggling really low, although with the fall of Nyasha things seem to be moving, but in general the Tech 2 ships were pretty low in price, I think partly because of that. But I do wonder if the market is a little bit worried about where Tech 2 ships will go from here, with, well, perhaps also the Triglavians. I mean, those guys are coming into the meta. Edencom getting buffed a little bit. Are there changes on the horizon, perhaps to faction ships and things like that, that could mean lower usage in general of Tech 2 ships? It's pretty obvious. This was also something that was mentioned, I think, during the live stream, that CCP is shooting for more diversity on the battlefield. Some of the biggest battles are not just dominating by the biggest ship or a single ship type. You've got quite a bit more counterplay in the meta, and that's something that they like. They might push for more, which could be you know, something that is lingering in the market's hive mind, you could say, where Tech 2 ships have perhaps dominated a bit too much. Oh yeah, definitely also something that was mentioned during that live stream is that they should look at, and that they want to look at, the heavy assault cruisers being so dominant for so long. And so this across the board could be part of the reason, including the lower production costs, as to why we're seeing this lack of demand and this really low price in general in Tech 2 ships this week, which creates opportunities in my opinion. I mean, stuff like that Cerberus, that Guardian, that's pretty damn interesting to me. The stealth bombers, you know, the Hound, if you haven't jumped in last time during this dip, you can do so at an even better price now. This is filled with opportunity, but admittedly, as always with the market, there's risk on the other side as well. Let's move on to the Tech 3 ships at 42.35. There we go, and let's get started with these destroyers that, despite this Confessor jump, have been able to remain pretty damn stable. Now in the last week we do see the Confessor jump up above 40 million and then slowly come back down from that. 42 million for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers. Half a page of new supply with 61 here in the last 24 hours should land very smoothly on that 40 million range. I'm not seeing anything too special. Perhaps a little bit of you know, a Confessor fleet being bought. It's pretty obvious that there was a volume here. that has caused this. So I would say, yeah, a Nullstick alliance, getting a Confessor fleet up and running makes a lot of sense here. Then the Hecate, in response, you could say, is slowly edging back towards 40 million as well. I'm hoping to see slightly less supply here. That's exactly what we're seeing. Almost 40 million for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers. But look at the last 24 hours, just 2 sell orders, quite a few less because the Confessor is at a better price. And then next we have the Jackdaw that is continuing to actually pull away from 40 million very slowly. Was perhaps oversupplied a bit. We clearly have a lack of demand. This is surprising me actually. 38 million for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers. Last 24 hours and last 2 days almost this full page. 55 here, 25. So actually I would say that looking at these numbers here, then here, but combine that with this, look at how old some of these are. The Jackdaw is surprisingly oversupplied, despite the fact that it is the cheapest of what I'm gonna say the most popular ones at the moment. Not necessarily the best ones, but the most popular ones. This is quite a bit of surprise. We could see, in my opinion, 2 things. Just the natural market taking over here, saying, all right, we're going to build some more Confessor, build some more Jackdaws. This should then start to dry up. Or we could also see a big purchase if someone is interested in making a Jackdaw fleet. I'm fully expecting this, though, to not get completely out of whack at the moment. And then we have the Zwepel finally. That's a big volume spike all of a sudden. That's all happening today. I'm not sure what's happening here. 38 million for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. That is clearly very low. Last 24 hours, half a page with 59. That feels in line with everything else. So this is a weird volume spike. Could be a bug, to be honest, because I'm not seeing the impact on the market itself. So at the moment, I would say we're decently well supplied, definitely not oversupplied in these destroyers. And the Jackdaw feels like it's slightly lower, slightly oversupplied, but I think if we look at, for instance, what's happening with Confessor and Hecate, that will solve itself very smoothly, and I'm expecting that 40 million across the board to be quite doable at the moment. Next up, we have our cruisers. Here is the Legion continuing its sideways movement at a pretty low price point. 139 million for the sellers, 126 million for the buyers. So if you want to jump in on what looks like an opportunity to grab a cheap Tech 3 ship, and you want to gamble on another spike to happen at some point, which perhaps again that live stream they're mentioning, yeah, Tech 3 cruisers, look at this price, look at the usage, it's just not really finding its niche anymore in EVE Online. Perhaps we should give it that role. If that happens, I mean, that's not for the short term, but if that happens, getting a cheap one could make sense. Here's the low-key, not even managing to get back above 150. For the average price, 152 million for the sellers, 135, definitely very cheap as well. Then we have the Proteus moving away from the bottom of 130, but honestly this is quite reasonable. 140 million for the sellers, 133 million for the buyers. And then finally we have the Tengu that is continuing a slow downtrend, slow wavy downtrend back below 150, 114 million in fact for the sellers, and 126 million for the buyers. So if you have interest in Tech 3 ships, Tech 3 cruisers, definitely grab your hull right now. I would say I myself am trading for the Legion, so I have a Legion, and that does mean that while I bought it a little bit speculatively, hoping that we would see a spike at some point, because I mean, look at the supply. This is really not a lot of ships for 1 year low prices. Here is the Proteus, not a single sell order above 10. We're talking probably 15 ships in the last 24 hours, and look at how old these orders are. Legion, I mean, there's 64 here, but it's also really low in price. And then the Loki probably slightly better supplied, yeah, with 37 here. But honestly, to have these bottom prices with this type of supply feels unnatural to me. But at the same time, you know, I'm also training up towards these ships so that I can use them if the bubble doesn't happen. So Tech 3, very weird, but if you want a cruiser or if you want to be ready for a cruiser, I would definitely recommend preparing at the moment. And then we have the extra material for this week. I decided to go back to some faction ships here, faction battleships coming in at 4810. Here we go. Ships, battleships, faction battleships. Let's start as always, or as mostly, with the pirate factions. Here is the Barghest. Alright, still very expensive. 900 million ISK for the sellers, 820 million ISK for the buyers. Not a lot of supply for the Barghest at the moment. Is there trade happening? Just one of them in the Tranquility Trading Tower. So this one is clearly very expensive at the moment. An incredible platform, of course. Also shields, missiles, and does it have a decent drone bay? Let's take a quick look at that. Yeah, drone capacity 75. So this is of course also the winning combination for PvE. Looks very unique and it is very expensive at the moment. Next up here is the Macarial. That's kind of interesting. Right at the tail end here we had to dive down to 400 million ISK, and then we actually jumped up in the last week back to a one-year high point, or very close to that. 510 million for the sellers, 430 million for the buyers. Quite a few volumes, so Macarials definitely part of the meta as well. I think this could be tied to the war, this sudden jump right here. Next up we've got the Nestor, also a jump, not on that much in volumes, but it must also be said from a relatively low price point. We went down to 420 million-ish, I'm gonna say, right here at the low point, settled at 450, and now we jumped up to 511 million for the sellers, 456 for the buyers. So if you happen to have one of these battleships, Barghest, Macarial, Nestor so far, looks like a good time to sell for the best price that you could have gotten in the last 4 months or so. Nightmare, that one was actually decently high at 650 million, but this again probably tied to nullsec, tied to the war, more usage. I think Nightmare fleets are stable for test, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I could definitely be wrong on that. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Yeah, Nightmare fleets are definitely a thing in nullsec. 650 million for most of the year. We went down to 600 million, and we're already back up at 664. 566 for the buyer. So very expensive at the moment, I'm going to say again, for the Nightmare, and not a bad time to sell at 664. That's up here. Next up we have the Balgorn. Actually very impressive performance for the full year. Started at 250. Probably one of the cheapest faction battleships at the moment. Was nerfed quite badly, I think, when it lost its ability to just completely destroy a capacitor of smaller targets. I think that's part of that rebalance. So this one is now going for 367 million ISK, buyers at 333. Complete lack of availability. I do think volumes will be down to 25 a day. This is just not really super in the meta. I wonder if you could build something PvE on this though, because that does make for a very cheap faction battleship option. It's got the drones, that's for sure. Trade stasis web optimal range. All right, long webs. So this is what's basically what used to make it super powerful and expensive, but has been nerfed substantially. And we get a large energy turret bonus. Will drain targets regardless of your own capacitor level. All right. I mean, the E-War it uses is not that useful, but perhaps it's something I'm thinking about. Grabbing a Balgorn, seeing what we can do perhaps in Eden campsites and things like that. And then we have, of course, the king of PvE. Here is the Rattlesnake. Went up to 900 million ISK at its high point, and then actually trading pretty low for the last couple of months, well below 600 million ISK. Is now slowly going back up. 633 million for the sellers and 576 for such a powerful platform. Obviously the Rattlesnake is incredible value. Compare that to the Barghest, that's way more expensive at the moment. Compare that to a Macarial, even the Nightmare. Yeah, Rattlesnake being one of the cheaper ones is pretty damn impressive. And then finally we've got the Vindicator. I think this could be tied to nullsec as well, although I mean it is a unique brawler that actually has its usage in PvE as well. So this one is shooting up to close to its 1 year high point. Yeah, definitely 920 million for the sellers, 742 for the buyers. That's a pretty big margin opening up on yeah, quite a lot of demand it seems for these pirate faction battleships. Very surprising, very expensive at the moment, pretty damn cool, and could be part of that what I was saying, that perhaps the market is thinking about that more diverse meta that exists at the moment and is jumping on other stuff than Tech 2 ships. Let's take a quick look at the Navy battleships. We'll start with the Thunderchild. Still haven't bought one of these. Currently selling for 285 million, 290 for most, and buyers at 236. Feels like it is definitely affordable, right? This is not super expensive, and perhaps I should just get ready and buy myself a Thunderchild. Apocalypse Navy issue edging at its high point for the year, 450 million, and a complete lack of availability. 463 million for the sellers, 400 million for the buyers. Volumes are down the drain, so this is just expensive due to a lack of availability. Armageddon Navy issue is slightly better in the volume. No, it's actually not good in the volumes either, going 400 million ISK. 420 for the sellers, 382 for the buyers. Slightly better availability, although this is also not a lot of ships that are on the market. But that slight bit of extra competition is keeping the price a bit more in check. Dominic's Navy issue, decent volumes, but also more expensive. Start at 500 million, goes up to 600 million at the tail end. 620 for the sellers, 520 for the buyers. Availability again next to nothing. Megatron Navy issue, 500 million for the sellers. Look at that availability again. Raven Navy. Now I'm curious. Raven Navy issue, 1 year high point, 550 million. Does it take a decent amount of minerals to make this stuff? Industry. Yeah, that's a decent amount of minerals. So this is probably getting hit by a double whammy. 610 to 617 million for the sellers. But again, can't browse. This is all that's available on the JITA market. 540 and the Tranquility Trading Tower, 540 million for the sellers for, well, a very straightforward shields, missiles. Does it have drones? I'm actually kind of curious about that as well. Now all of a sudden, doesn't have drones, I don't think. Yeah, it actually has. Ooh, man, this has, yeah, this is again one of that PvE winning combinations in my opinion, and it's better than the Galente ones, but the availability is really not good. Very high price, 1 year high point. Scorpion Navy issue going up to 500 million ISK as well, 530 on not a lot of availability. Tempest Fleet issue, 500 million ISK, 1 year high point as well. Look at the number of ships here. That is not a lot. And then finally Typhoon Fleet issue, 1 year high point as well, going up to 580 million ISK. So this is really interesting for me personally. All of these faction pirates, all of these faction battleships show very low availability. Even the pirate factions are not doing great, show very expensive prices. This is partly probably due to the mineral prices as well. But across the board, I'm seeing here, this is a ship that you don't want to lose. And so this definitely brings back that this is very expensive. Yep, but the value, the fact that the loss of one of these ships will matter quite a bit more all of a sudden is very, very impressive. That does mean that the Rattlesnake is in a unique situation, starting to pull back up. This could actually be an opportunity for investors, although it remains a little bit of a gamble. But this is the first time to me that the and then the Thunderchild being so cheap, I'm gonna buy one. I have to buy one, I think, just to have it, to be ready, to be able to use it and test it and things like that. But this is a sign that CCP is being somewhat successful when it comes to making loss more meaningful in the game again. Perhaps a Tech 1 battleship. I'm writing that down for next week. I'm curious now. T1. Wow, it actually is not easy to write that down, but that's for next week. But here in these faction battleships, so many of these are so expensive, so low in availability, that I really feel like losing one of these is something that is a lot more painful than 6 months ago or a year ago. And as a result here, this is quite interesting to see. It's definitely something that we'll take another look at next week with the Tech 1 battleships and the impact of all of the changes that CCP has been doing on that market as well. That's gonna be it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.